My name is Snyder. I'm here representing Secular Pro-Life, which is basically an anti-abortion group run by atheists. We make space in the pro-life movement for non-religious people and for really anybody who wants to use secular arguments. I actually graduated from UC Berkeley in 2011 in chemical biology, and I never thought I would come back here to, just present. I never thought I'd be coming back here to give a talk on being anti-abortion. I have 30 minutes and I'm going to cover 3 topics. My talk is Deconstructing 3 pro-choice myths. So I'm going to speak very quickly, but if you have any questions or arguments or clarifications, or if you just want to see my sources, I literally printed out a list of all my sources for this talk. During lunch I will have them at the Secular Pro-Life table outside, so please feel free to come check it out. I'm just going to get started. First myth is that we don't know when human life begins. You see stories like this talking about how pro-lifers are making very black and white a really gray, complicated issue, and that we can't just simply assert that science knows when human life begins. And before I explain why this is a myth, I want to clarify something. Am I talking about life as in biological life, or am I talking about a philosophical view? This is really important. So the pro-life view, very briefly in a nutshell, is that the fetus, or zygote or embryo, is a human organism. All human organisms are morally relevant. That is, they are people, they have value. It's generally immoral to kill people, and therefore abortion is generally immoral. But it's very important to understand that these are not all the same type of claim. The first claim is a scientific claim. It is a fact that all fetuses are human organisms. The second 2 claims are philosophical claims. Science does not tell us who is or isn't morally relevant. Science doesn't tell us what is or isn't a morally right action to take. In order to establish that, you have to talk about philosophy or religion or whatever, but you have to get into sort of less fact and more argument and opinion. And it's really important for pro-lifers to understand this distinction, because what I see happen all the time is pro-lifers will just skip the middle part. And they'll just say, well, science says the fetus is a human organism, so abortion is wrong, right? But the problem with that is you are packing everything into one sentence. You're assuming the things that the person you're talking to might not agree with, especially the idea that all human organisms are equally morally relevant. Josh spent a lot of time explaining how people have lots of very different ideas about that. And if you just skip that, if you just say, science says people start at conception, so abortion is wrong, then the other side doesn't have anything to argue against except the one sentence you said. And so they might say, well, science doesn't say when life begins. And what they mean is science can't do philosophy's job. Science can't tell you who is or isn't morally relevant. But what you hear is, they don't understand biology. Of course science can say when life begins, because you don't realize you're doing this sort of bait and switch, and it's confusing. The reason I make that clarification is because that is not what is happening here. This is not an accidental bait and switch. These are people touting scientific credentials to misconstrue science. They are not saying, yes, of course we begin as zygotes, but philosophically, why does that matter? They're saying biology itself can't tell us when life begins, okay? And I would love to go through every single one of these with you and show you exactly where the bait and switch happens. I don't have time, so I'm just going to very quickly hit on 2. My personal favorite. A couple years ago, Bill Nye did this 4.5-minute video where he spouts his views on abortion, and this is what my Google newsfeed looked like. Science, 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 science. Newsweek said that Bill Nye brings down the hammer of science on abortion opponents. And sure enough, in his video, he says that we have a deep scientific lack of understanding, that our positions are based on bad science. He's not saying, yes, of course we begin at fertilization, but you need more than that philosophically. He's saying we've got the science wrong. And so I'm very curious what it is he thinks we've got wrong. Are we not organisms? Do we not begin as zygotes? What specifically about the science have we got wrong? But sadly, he never actually says that in the entire video. In fact, the video barely talks about science at all. And I don't have time to go through every single thing that was wrong with this video. Go look up this blog post. It's one of the most popular blog posts we have ever written at Secular Pro-Life, and it explains it. But my point is, this is not, oh, we're just confusing philosophy and biology. This is them saying that science says we're wrong. And that's not really what they're talking about. Here's the other example. This article came out during the primaries for the last election. The author was getting frustrated because Republicans keep saying things like, life begins at fertilization. And so he says, as an embryologist and the author of embryological textbooks, I can say with absolute assurance There is no consensus among embryologists as to when an individual human life begins. And if you read the article, he says that embryologists are really divided on this, and some of them think it doesn't begin till birth. He doesn't quote a single embryologist that says, in terms of embryology, we're not alive till birth, because nobody says that. But he claims that's the argument. He did write embryological textbooks. This is his developmental biology textbook, 6th edition, and in this textbook, same author, Scott Gilbert, he says, when we consider a dog, for instance, we usually picture an adult. But the dog is a dog from the moment of fertilization of a dog egg by a dog sperm. It remains a dog even as a senescent dying hound. Therefore, the dog is actually the entire life cycle of the animal from fertilization through death. Yeah, good job, Scott Gilbert. His more recent version of the same book didn't have that quote, but it does have a chapter called Fertilization, Beginning of a New Organism. And it says fertilization accomplishes two separate ends: the combining of genes derived from two parents, and reproduction, the generation of a new organism. So Scott Gilbert, the biology textbook author, is saying fertilization generates a new organism. Individuals are individuals from fertilization to death. And note in his biology textbooks, and I have copies of the textbooks, I checked this myself, he doesn't say, I'm asserting one possible view, but it's a really divided thing and there's lots of controversy, because there's not. In terms of the biology, there's not. And it's not just his own textbook that contradicts his political opinions. It's a whole bunch of textbooks. Every one of these textbooks pictured here has a specific overt quote saying that the mammalian life cycle or the human life cycle begins with the zygote. And there's way more than this. I'm not going to take pictures of 50 million textbooks, but if you want to check it yourself, all the sources in my sources handout. So the key point to remember here is that the political opinions of scientists or people who like to talk to political scientists is not the same thing as decades of embryological and biological textbooks that have established what we have known for a very long time, which is that all humans begin as zygotes. That is a fact. The idea that we don't know biologically when human life begins is absolutely a myth. Okay, myth 2. Most or all late-term abortions are medically necessary. When you have late-term abortion legislation come up, or when a presidential candidate says they're going to rip babies from the womb, you get stories like this. And I want to emphasize, the stories I showed you earlier about when life begins, you can skip those. Those are drivel. You should read these stories. These are true stories. These are serious, heartbreaking stories that we should be aware of. That's not the myth. The myth is that these represent most late-term abortions. Okay? And before I get into why that's a myth, let me define what I mean by late term, because it's not a very technical phrase. So some people think that it means anything after the first trimester. Some people think it means any abortion after viability when the fetus has roughly a 50-50 chance of surviving if born. Some people think it's only abortions in the third trimester. And rather than input my own definition here for a speech, I read all of those stories I just showed you, and I marked when they had their abortion. So each one of these red lines is one of those stories. So I think it's fair for the purposes of this speech to say that late-term abortion is the second and third trimester. Anything after the first trimester, if I say late-term abortion, I'm talking about anything after the first trimester, unless otherwise specified. And it's important to understand, and a lot of people don't realize this, especially outside the pro-life movement, that elective, that is non-medical, late-term abortion is legal in all 50 states, at least to some point. Okay, here's how it breaks down. The earliest, there's 2 states where it is prohibited after 18 weeks, so that's 5 weeks into the second trimester. Then there's a whole bunch at the 20-week mark, usually related to fetal pain legislation. There's a whole bunch at viability. And then there are actually 14 states where you can get a non-medical late-term abortion after viability, including 7 states where you can get it at literally any time in the entire pregnancy. It is legal in these 7 states to get a non-medical abortion any time in the pregnancy. That's not to say it's easy to do. From my understanding, there's only 4 doctors in the entire country that perform third trimester abortions, but it is legal to do. For reference, this is California viability. So in California, you can get a non-medical abortion all the way until viability. Okay? Now, to be clear, all of these restrictions have exceptions. 21% make exceptions if there's a severe problem, health problem with the fetus. 44% make exceptions if the physician believes the mother's psychological, emotional, mental health is threatened. 91% make exceptions for physical health, and all of them make exceptions if her life is in danger. but this is the legal status in our country for a late-term elective abortion. And that's important because Americans do not like late-term elective abortion. Okay? Poll after poll shows that if you ask them about abortion later in the pregnancy, including people who call themselves pro-choice, most of them are not okay with it. And if you ask them about like supporting the 20-week ban, most people support it. This headline says millennials have a surprising view. It's only surprising if you haven't looked at all the polls looking at this the entire time. Okay? It's very consistent. Americans, including Americans who call themselves pro-choice, don't like elective late-term abortion. However, Americans are very open to medically necessary abortion. If you ask them about if the woman's life is in danger, the vast majority think abortion should be legal. And even if you ask them about if there's a problem with the fetal health, a good half of them still think that abortion should be legal. But if you ask them about anything non-medical, socioeconomic reasons or any reason, that number plummets. And not just late-term, in general. Americans don't like late-term abortion, and they actually don't really like elective abortion, and they really don't like elective late-term abortion. So if you're pro-choice and you want to protect late-term abortion rights, what's the strategy? Do you say, well, too bad, it's none of your business. You can get a 5-month abortion for any reason, butt out. You could say that, and some people do, not super persuasive. So instead, every time we talk about late-term abortion, these are the only stories we talk about. Every one of these stories is about a wanted pregnancy where something terrible went wrong with the fetus and the woman made a heartbreaking decision, broke her heart. Okay? And these are just some of the conditions we're talking about. And I'm not going to get into today false positive diagnoses or the ethics of killing versus letting die or the meaning of suffering. I'm just going to leave all of that aside. Let's just assume for the sake of argument that we all agree that this is legit. Okay? These are horrifying. Brain leaking out of the skull, bones fused together so when you're born they all break. Genetics can be terrifying. Okay? And that's worth considering. But again, the important point I'm trying to drive home is these are not most late-term abortions. Now, people read these emotionally impactful stories, and people are very persuaded by emotionally impactful stories. Usually much more persuaded by that than by data. And on top of that, data is very hard to find for this particular myth. I think this myth is purported innocently. I think the people who say this genuinely believe it's true, and you're usually coming from a very good place, unlike the last myth. So, we did find, this is from Guttmacher, if you don't know, it's a heavily pro-choice research organization, used to be the research arm of Planned Parenthood, and they published a study, and if you go pull the study down and you find Table 6, it talks about abortions for fetal and personal health concerns. Emphasis on the word concerns. It could be that there's actually a medical problem, or it could be that they just were worried that maybe there might be, and they'll still include that in this category. So it's a very broad definition, okay? And even with this really broad definition, here's the part where you see, after 13 weeks, this is late term, okay? And for all the abortions after 13 weeks, they found that 21% were for fetal health concerns and 10% were for personal health concerns. So to make that easier to see, this is the first trimester, according to Guttmacher, where 75% of the abortions are not even done for concerns about health, much less actual health problems. And then all the late-term abortions, it's a higher proportion for health reasons, but 69% of late-term abortions are still not even done for health concerns. And I was curious what this would look like if you could go even later. Because it's reasonable to believe that the further you go along in the pregnancy, the more often it'll be for health reasons. Nobody voluntarily keeps a pregnancy they don't want just to get a more difficult abortion later, right? Just as it's hard to find data for second trimester, it's even hard to find it for further than that. But the state of Arizona does actually report there are abortions for fetal and maternal health reasons. There's two trends I want you to notice here. First, look at this difference in proportion. Here's Guttmacher, here's Arizona. Okay? It's because Guttmacher, and they say this up front, you can read this in their study, they're not hiding it. Guttmacher's using a very broad definition. If a woman is worried she won't have access to good prenatal care, they count that as a fetal health concern abortion. Okay? Whereas Arizona is just talking about actual health problems. And so Guttmacher, 25% of the first trimester for health concerns. Arizona, less than 0.5%. So there's a big difference there depending on the definition you use, and that's important. But the second trend is, you can see, as you go further on, the proportion for health reasons does get bigger, especially for fetal health reasons. The maternal health reasons, kind of the same. Fetal health reasons gets bigger and bigger because of those stories we were just looking at where you have a wanted pregnancy and then something goes wrong, right? And even with that being the case, Even at 21 weeks or later, you're almost to viability now. If the fetus was born, they'd have a 50-50 chance of surviving. And even then, 80% of them are not done for health-related reasons. Now, I was really curious what this would look like for the third trimester. And I literally could not find any quantifiable data about the third trimester. And that's not a mystery. Third trimester abortions are extremely, extremely rare, relatively speaking, and very stigmatized. Nobody is going to be very open about getting a non-medical third trimester abortion. Most people don't even want to talk about the medical ones. It's just too horrifying, right? So the only data I found was in Florida, there were 2 in like 5 years. One was for maternal health reasons, one wasn't. But you know what you can do with a sample set of 2? Nothing. A sample set of 2 doesn't tell you anything, right? So absent quantifiable data, I looked up the 4 doctors who provide abortions in the third trimester, and it turns out some of them do interviews, and 3 of them have gone on record explaining that they're not all for medical reasons. This is Dr. Susan Robinson in Albuquerque, New Mexico, talking about women who come to her in the third trimester because they didn't know they were pregnant before that, which is not as ridiculous as it sounds. Women's body is highly variable. There's all sorts of reasons you might not realize, but the point is, she says, they think they just got pregnant. They have no idea they're in their 24th week. So they make an appointment for an abortion, and it takes a few weeks, and they have their ultrasound and find they're at 27 weeks, which is too far for an abortion anywhere. So then what happens? They either give up and have the baby, or they go on the internet and they find us. She's overtly explaining that these aren't all for dire medical reasons. Her colleague, Dr. Shelley Sella, from the same clinic in New Mexico, she told the interviewer that the women she treats fall into 2 categories. Those who discover fetal abnormalities and those with healthy, viable babies whose maternal circumstances mean they could not cope with the baby. Quick note, Dr. Sella chooses to use the word baby instead of fetus, which is why the interviewer did. And if you read this interview, she goes on to explain some very serious circumstances that are why she chooses to abort third trimester healthy, viable babies. Here is Dr. Warren Hearn of Boulder, Colorado. Notice these are all in the states where elective abortion is legal the entire pregnancy. And he doesn't share his clinic statistics and rarely speaks of individual cases, but Hearn has said he also performs late abortions for women who are not facing any grave medical outcome. So whatever data we can find flies completely in the face of the idea that late-term abortions are always or even usually for medical reasons. And the people providing it themselves will tell you that it's not always for medical reasons. So when you're having this debate about late-term abortions, understand that these are true stories that do happen and are more complicated than your average abortion discussion, but they represent these slices. And it makes as much sense to talk about elective late-term abortion in terms of this. I'm sorry, it doesn't make sense to talk about it just in terms of this because most of late-term abortion is elective. And you don't make policy based on the hard cases for everything. You can craft it differently. So understand when you're talking about late-term abortion, take this seriously and know it's not the norm. Third myth, abortion restrictions don't stop abortions. You see a lot of stories about how if a woman really wants to get an abortion, she will, whether it's legal or not. You're just making it more dangerous. And if you really wanted to stop abortion, you would increase access to contraception. And I'm not going to get into the contraception thing today. I don't have time. My point here is just that this is false. Abortion restrictions absolutely decrease abortions. And even Guttmacher, which is, so Guttmacher, let me back up. All of these stories are referencing Guttmacher. If you read these articles, every single one of them, their source for establishing their point is a Guttmacher report. And Guttmacher says, this is a good example, in 2009, they look at worldwide abortions around the whole world, and they say that their data confirms the lack of an inherent relationship between the prevalence of abortion and its legal status. They're not just saying that if you outlaw abortion, there'll still be some minimum level left. They're saying it makes no difference at all. They're saying it's not even related, okay? These are the kind of studies they're looking at. This was published in 2016 in The Lancet by Guttmacher researchers, and here's what they did. They break the world into these regions and they look at the abortion rates. Green is low, red is high. And they look at a lot of other things too. And then they compare them. And here's the key. If you go to this report and you go to table 4, they break the world into abortion legality. Okay? So here is the 58 countries where abortion is illegal or legal only to save the mother's life. And in those countries, the average rate is 37 abortions per 1,000 women. And then here is the 63 countries where abortion is available on request. So usually that means at least in the first trimester you can get elective abortion. and they have 34 abortions per 1,000 women. So the report concludes, we did not observe an association between the abortion rates and the grounds under which it's legally allowed. This is the kind of data that all those articles are referencing. They say, see, it doesn't make any difference. They're illegal here, they have about the same rate, even slightly higher, so quit wasting your time, right? The problem is, if you know anything about data collection, you know that if you want to isolate a variable and see how it affects things, you have to account for all the other variables that could affect that thing. So you're looking at the entire world, right? And you're not comparing all these other factors. And most importantly, you're not talking about unintended pregnancy rates. Everybody agrees. The pro-choice side correctly points out that if you can decrease unintended pregnancy, you decrease abortion. So that's probably important, right? Okay, here, let me run through exactly why this matters in case it's not completely clear. You have two hypothetical countries, right? They both have legal access to abortion. The Planned Parenthood clinic is open. You can get elective abortion at least in the first trimester. The first country has a low unintended pregnancy rate. For whatever reason, wealth, education, could be a lot of things. The second country has a really high unintended pregnancy rate. If they have the same access to abortion, anybody who wants one can get one, which country will have more abortions? B, of course it's B, right? Nobody's gonna argue with that. Let's switch it up. Let's say they have the exact same unintended pregnancy rate. And one country has really easy access to abortion, and one country it's illegal. You can't get it unless your life is endangered. So you have roughly the same proportion of women who might want an abortion, and one group can get it very, very easily, and one group would have to really struggle to get it. So which country will have the higher abortion rate? When you make something easier to do, more people do that thing. Now the real question, and this is the relevant one, country A has a really low unintended pregnancy rate, so less abortions. And they have really easy access, so more abortions. And then country B has a really high unintended pregnancy rate, so more abortions. But it's really hard to get them, so less. So which one of these will have the higher abortion rate? It's a trick question, you don't know. It depends on the magnitude of these factors, it depends on other factors too, but this is exactly what Guttmacher did. They compared the developed world to the developing world, only they ignored the unintended pregnancy rates, and they're like, wow, their abortion rates are about the same, so I guess the law doesn't matter, right? This is as silly as if you ignored the laws and you said, wow, this whole group has really low unplanned pregnancy, this group has really high, and their abortion rates are almost the same, so I guess pregnancy isn't related, right? No, guys, no. You have to look at both, and other things too, I'm just simplifying. So if you break this down into numbers, and bear with me here, here's the regions of the world they looked at. And in 2018, they published a new study, same regions of the world, same time frame, but instead of looking at abortion, they looked at unplanned pregnancy. So here's abortion from the 2016 study. Green is low, red is high. Here's the unplanned pregnancy rates. And as you might expect, the places with the lowest abortion rates have really low unplanned pregnancy. And the places with higher have higher. But that's not the interesting part. Here's the interesting part. Look how variable this is. Eastern Africa has the highest unplanned pregnancy rates in the world, and their abortion rates are the same or lower than places with far less unplanned pregnancy. Why is that? And if you're a Guttmacher, I guess you think it's because pregnancy doesn't matter. They don't ever say that, guys. I'm just saying that's the thought process. If you look at the percent of unplanned pregnancies aborted, you start to see a really important pattern here, okay? Notice how many of these columns are green in one column and red in the other, or vice versa. What that means is the places with really low unplanned pregnancy abort a lot of their unplanned pregnancies. And the places with really high unplanned pregnancy don't abort very many of them. Why do you think that is? It's because of the law, okay? Here is the unplanned pregnancies. You can see that, for example, Africa has a lot of unplanned pregnancies, and they also have really restrictive abortion policies. And say North America, low unplanned pregnancies, really legal abortion. These are opposing forces. It's exactly the hypothetical I just showed you. It's exactly the same thing. And you see the same thing in the United States too. I know this is hard to read. This is the United States, including Washington, D.C. This is all data from Guttmacher, okay? Here's the abortion rates. New York is the highest, 28.9 abortions per 1,000 women. Here's the unplanned pregnancy rates, and just like before, the places with the lowest amount of abortion generally have less unplanned pregnancy, and opposite is true. And just like before, there's all this variability in the middle. Here's the law. So red means more restrictions on abortion. So basically think of red as a pro-life state, and green is like no restrictions, so it's like a pro-choice state, okay? And just like I was talking about, you have all this area in the middle where it's really, really similar despite all this variability. You have really pro-choice liberal places like New Hampshire and Oregon where they have low unplanned pregnancy and easy access to abortion, and their rates are about the same as really conservative pro-life places like Mississippi and Louisiana with high unplanned pregnancy and really restricted access to abortion. But generally, the places with the least abortion have low unplanned pregnancy and restricted access, and the places with the most have high unplanned pregnancy and easy access. Why, guys? Because these both matter. Obviously, unplanned pregnancy matters. We want to reduce unplanned pregnancies. The law also matters. They both make a difference, okay? And you don't have to believe my hand-wavy, colorful analysis that I did for you all by myself, right? There are decades of peer-reviewed journal articles looking just at the United States in different journals by different authors that all have found that when you make abortion harder to get, less people get it. And people will say, well, yeah, because they're not counting the illegal abortions. They're just counting the legal abortions. Those go down, the illegal ones go up. No, that's not what they do. They look at fertility rates. When you make abortion harder to get, there's more births. That covers legal and illegal, okay? And I know you don't have time to read all this right now. I have the sources for all of these. If you want to look them up, don't believe me. Look them up and read them yourself. This is what the research shows. So you can look at really quick summaries of global studies with totally dissimilar rates that don't have much to do with our situation. Or you can look at the data in our own country, or account for the other factors in the global studies, either one or both, and you find that, yes, of course, when you make something harder to do, less people do that thing. That's the third myth. So I know a lot of times it feels like this wall of authoritative and popular voices telling us that the basic things we think are either quaint or just dangerous, but certainly wrong, and all of our bases are stupid, right? But if you actually dig into the data, there is no substance here. This is mostly just indignation disguised by authority, and some genuine empathy and concern, but it's not based on the facts. If you dig into the data, it's abundantly clear. Every human organism begins as a zygote. Literally every person in this room, every person you've ever met, every person you've ever heard of that actually existed, all of them began as zygotes. Most late-term abortions are not for medical reasons, and if you're okay with that, fine, just understand that that's true. And abortion restrictions absolutely do decrease abortion. So, if you have any questions about any of this, if you think I missed anything, if there's a weakness in my argument, come find me. Especially at lunch, I'll be at the Secular Pro-Life table, and you can tell me where I'm wrong. And if you want to see the sources, you can either get them from me or go to our blog. Our post from today is all the sources for this with hyperlinks. You can click on them, read it yourself. But this is the truth. That's all I got.